Detroit, a brutal gang strikes again and again, targeting residents in terrifying home invasions. They attack quickly, take what they want, and leave no evidence behind. As the assaults continue, the FBI and local police join forces to stop the terror. In the end, authorities come face to face with a vicious gang that refuses to be taken alive.
In the 1990s, neighborhoods in Detroit were terrorized by a gang of robbers. Impersonating police officers, they invaded over 100 homes, robbing, raping, and torturing their victims. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The extraordinary number and sheer magnitude of these home invasions stunned authorities. As residents feared for their lives, agents teamed up with local police to take down this sadistic gang.
Detroit, Michigan, February 1994. In some neighborhoods, narcotics trafficking is a way of life, and drug busts by the local police are routine. This raid is anything but routine. The men ask the resident where he keeps his drugs and money. He refuses to talk, confident that police officers would never hurt him.
You're the police, you can't shoot me. Hurry up, yo! Hurry up! Wait, I got it. Yo, hurry up, yo, hurry up, let's go! Hurry up, we got it! Hurry up! We got it! Come on, man, let's go!
The man calls police and reports that officers broke into his home, assaulted him, then stole money and jewelry. The patrolmen know the resident is a local narcotics dealer. They also know there were no drug raids scheduled for that address. Could these home invaders be rogue cops? The incident is part of a wave of excessively violent home invasions plaguing Detroit. Averaging more than one a week, they spread fear throughout the city. The invaders leave no useful evidence behind. In June 1994, the newly formed Safe Streets Violent Crimes Task Force dedicates itself to putting an end to the terror. It is comprised of Detroit police detectives and FBI agents, including Special Agent Michael Kosanovich.
We really were determined to solve these violent home invasions. Initially, we were aware of approximately 50 home invasion robberies from the beginning of '94 up through June of '94. They were fairly violent. They involved shootings, sexual assaults.
Investigators begin by searching for connections between the numerous invasions. Detroit police officer Tom Dunai.
We took a look at all the police reports that were taken over the previous 2 or 3 months. We analyzed them, we broke them down into the MOs and exactly what these perpetrators were doing on each one.
Investigators identify a recurring method used in the attacks, according to Special Agent Bob Pertuso.
The gang used a dynamic approach that law enforcement officers use when they execute a search warrant or make an arrest to gain quick entry into a home and then take control of the occupants. They all wore masks and they were all armed with semi-automatic pistols, assault rifles, MAC-10s.
Based on this consistent MO, the task force suspects that a single group is committing most of the invasions.
We were able to narrow this down to, yes, it was a gang of about anywhere from 4 to 8. The descriptions all fit the same. Their MO was the same. Everything was the same on almost every home invasion.
To gather more first-hand information, investigators re-interview the victims of the home invasions.
Dan, you had some excitement here the other day.
They learn that most of them are involved in narcotics trafficking. FBI Special Agent Michael Kosanovich is not surprised that dealers are reluctant to talk.
They don't want to reveal the fact that they were selling drugs or conducting illegal activity out of that residence.
Detective Sergeant Tom Barry tells the dealers that the task force has no interest in busting them for narcotics.
People are getting raped, they're violent. We don't care about the drugs. We need your cooperation. About 90% of the time, the drug guy come on board, you come on our team and say, hey, I deal my drugs, I know that's not right, I'll tell you what I know about this case.
Pose a gun at me and I'm like, he's a cop, you know.
Investigators discover that some home invasion victims are not drug dealers.
These sometimes elderly people, they're panicking, they're crying, they're begging. Got guns to the side of their head. Where's the dope? Where's the money? Where's the dope? Where's the money? There isn't any money. There isn't any dope.
The gang has simply hit the wrong house. Realizing that there are no drugs or money, they turn violent.
Did they ask you?
We heard all the horrible stories of the torture, 80-year-old women, pistol whipped, hit with the butts of shotguns.
FBI Special Agent Martin Vandervliet.
What really bothered us the most were the sexual assaults of the females who were present on 6 of the home invasions. One in particular, a mother and her 15-year-old daughter were raped simultaneously by 2 members of the home invasion group.
Just the look in their eyes, the fear, their anger that was very controlled, but yet was all inside their body. You could just feel it with their body emotions.
I'm so sorry.
The little girl, without saying it, just through her eyes, she said, please help us. Please help us. And that hit me. And that look in that girl's eyes will stay with me for the rest of my life. We told her that we would do anything in our power to bring these guys to justice. What I had to do is build their confidence up, leave phone calls every day to let them know that I'm still thinking about them, we didn't forget about anything, and we're on your side and you're well protected and you have nothing to worry about. The fright that was in them will always be there, but they knew they had the full cooperation of the Violent Crime Task Force on their side.
Skinny.
Concerned that the home invasions are executed like a police raid, the task force confronts the possibility the gang is made up of law enforcement personnel.
We checked to see any recent officers that have been fired from the job, maybe were accused of illegal use of narcotics, because this was all revolved around narcotics, you know. So you would check, you know, any ex-narcotic officers, and there was nothing.
Investigators quickly recognize that the escalating level of violence in these cases indicates that law enforcement is probably not involved.
In our experience, police officers aren't going to go that extra step and fire shots into a house or go rape a victim, things of that nature. It's usually go in and rob, go in and knock the door down, get their whatever they need and run out. So in the beginning, we had to look at that, but then we had to eliminate that as the more and more as the home invasions were occurring. It got more and more violent. We realized that it wasn't police officers or ex-police officers.
The biggest problem with these subjects acting as police when they committed these home invasions was that they jeopardized legitimate police officers. If a victim has been robbed before by this gang, and then the police show up another time to execute a search warrant legitimately, they may start shooting or try to harm the police officers.
So what we need to do is start going.
Now that investigators have a clearer idea of what they are dealing with, they begin their efforts to identify the members of the gang.
We looked at a number of people who had committed these offenses in the past, or robbery-type offenses of narcotics dealers. We contacted various informants and asked them to try and determine the identities of these individuals. However, none of the informants that we had talked to had any specific information regarding the people who were committing these offenses.
A couple of hours ago.
Over the next month, the home invasions continue, but the task force makes little progress.
Every home invasion in the city of Detroit where people went in posing as officers, we, the Violent Crime Task Force, would respond to it. So we got first-hand information, try to get a feel, are these our guys, are these not our guys, why are they or why are they not?
Investigators carefully process each scene, but can find no evidence.
Everything we did, we weren't getting lucky. We needed a break.
July 26, 1994. Nearly 2 months after the investigation began. Detroit police respond to a call about shots fired. They find a barely conscious man with multiple gunshot wounds. He has a gun, police jacket, bulletproof vest, and a ski mask. The clothing matches descriptions of home invaders given by prior victims. Police call for an ambulance. Officers alert the task force. This could be the break they need.
Here's a guy, he's got a gun on him, he's got a police vest on. And my only hope at the time was, please don't die. Please don't die.
Agents rush to the hospital, hoping the man pulls through. In Detroit, a joint FBI and police task force tackles an epidemic of violent home invasions perpetrated by an elusive gang who uses police-style tactics. Authorities get a break when they find and arrest a critically wounded man who they believe is part of the ring. FBI agents go to the hospital to question the suspect. Fingerprint identification reveals that his name is Dante Garrison. FBI Special Agent Martin Vandervliet.
He was in pretty bad shape at the time, having been shot 3 times in the arm, the leg, and stomach. He said he was aware of some robberies which had occurred, but he didn't want to go into specifics at that time.
Special Agent Michael Kosanovich remains hopeful.
We were encouraged by the situation, by our analysis of his emotional status, and the fact that we felt he's probably at some point going to cooperate if we can work this right, if we can talk to him and reason with him.
At Detroit Police Headquarters, the task force discusses strategies for persuading Garrison to cooperate. When the suspect's name comes up, Detroit officer Al Page recognizes it. He says he knows his family and had even once held Garrison when he was a baby. To Detective Sergeant Tom Berry, this is an extraordinary stroke of luck.
Now, what are the odds of that? So not only did he get shot and didn't die, we got one of our officers that knows him. This couldn't be any better.
Investigators return to the hospital, and Officer Page exploits his relationship with the suspect's family, hoping to cajole Garrison into cooperating. The ploy works. Garrison agrees to talk in exchange for immunity from prosecution. He admits that he is in fact a member of the home invasion gang and explains that his shooting was the result of an invasion that went terribly wrong.
But one of the occupants of the residence had seen them, said something, and they had fled. They believed that they could come back and successfully commit the home invasion the next night. However, the occupants of that residence were ready and waiting for them.
fled, leaving the wounded Garrison to fend for himself. Special Agent Bob Pertuso.
And that was the difference between these criminals and law enforcement. A law enforcement officer would not leave a fellow officer shot in some backyard.
Knowing Garrison is in poor physical shape, the task force keeps the interview short. They need to keep him healthy.
He was eventually moved out of the hospital and allowed to recuperate at home. Once he became capable of moving around without any assistance, it was decided that we should take him to an off-site location to have him fully debriefed.
The FBI secretly moves Garrison to a safe house outside of Detroit. Investigators inform him of the potential consequences of cooperating with the task force, according to Detroit police officer Tom Dunai.
We let him know that there is a real risk of him losing his life if these guys ever found out that he's talking with authorities about what has occurred. And he wanted protection to make sure nothing would happen to him. And naturally, we gave that protection to him and let him know his name wouldn't be brought up until the day of court.
The way it worked.
During intensive interviews, Garrison reveals that the gang has several more members than previously suspected.
As it turned out, it wasn't the same group of individuals who were committing these home invasions every time. It might be from 3 to 10 members. And it really depended on who was available when the call went out, who could respond to commit that home invasion that evening. If they were available, they would go. And if they needed money, they would go. If they didn't need money, maybe they might stay home that night.
He's like,
Garrison divulges that 2 career criminals control the gang.
real big, muscular.
Obie Carter and Andre Woods.
Obie and Andre Woods directed and determined which targets would be hit and which individuals would go on specific home invasions. Once a residence was targeted for a home invasion, Obie Carter would page all the gang members that were going to be involved that night. A few of the members would go out and conduct some surveillance on that location. They would try and identify residents, how many, ages. They would return back to the gang, debrief everyone, and then meet again later that night to actually conduct the home invasion.
Garrison reveals that Andre Woods actually stages mock-up raids for training purposes.
Andre Woods had taken the gang members to vacant houses to practice police-style raids, so that they would be familiar with techniques as far as how to make entry into the residence. They would enter just as the police would enter to secure it.
Once the residents are neutralized, the gang interrogates the victims.
You make him pay.
According to Garrison, Woods is extremely violent. He rapes some of his victims and tortures drug dealers when they won't talk.
Every week, every 2 weeks.
A lot of times, if the victims would not tell them where the money or the drugs were, they would physically beat them or shoot them until they were willing to provide that information.
Garrison describes one home invasion in which the gang tortured an elderly drug dealer.
They put the guns to him. Where's the dope? Where's the money? I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. They shot him in the leg. And he's in agonizing pain, and they're just hammering him again. And they didn't want to kill him. They wanted him to tell them where the drugs and the money was. Shot him again in the leg and said, "Hey, MFer, where's the drugs? We know you got the drugs. We know it's here. Where's it at? Give us, or you're gonna die, you're gonna die, you're gonna die." And they shot him again. He told them where it was at. Got their money, got their drugs, and they're on their way.
Once a home invasion was complete, they would return to the predetermined location. The money would be divided evenly among the members. Any valuables that someone was able to pick up, it was theirs to keep.
Gang member and drug dealer Chris Allen would handle the stolen narcotics.
This is prime weed, baby.
It was Chris Allen's responsibility to take those drugs out on the street, sell them, get the money for those drugs, and divide it evenly among the members.
It is also Allen who would suggest who to target for their home invasions.
Allen provided a lot of intelligence to the gang members as far as who would be good people to rob. Based on his knowledge of their narcotics dealing, he knew that they either would have drugs or money present when the gang went in.
Agents are impressed by Garrison's detailed recollection of past crimes.
We knew that this was the jewel. He was the break that we needed to make a significant impact on all these home invasion robberies.
Although Garrison's cooperation is critical to the investigation, it is unlikely that his testimony would stand up in court.
It would just be his word against theirs, and that would not be sufficient to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that these individuals were guilty of these crimes. We needed admissions from these people, or we needed to catch them in the act of committing a home invasion to be certain that they would be locked up.
Authorities must hit the streets and find a way to take down this violent gang. Detroit police and the FBI work to shut down a dangerous home invasion gang. They get a major break when a gang member is found shot and begins cooperating with the investigation.
Names I know.
You know where they hang out? What neighborhoods they live in?
Nah, man, they wasn't like my boy.
A joint FBI police task force begins using the informant's information to identify more gang members, according to Special Agent Martin Vandervliet.
A lot of them had criminal histories that matched up with what was occurring. We felt they were likely involved in this based on that. And we went out and did physical surveillance of their residences and could see that they were associating with other members of the group.
Although investigators have received detailed information about the gang's infrastructure from their cooperating witness, the task force needs more evidence to build their case. Authorities show photo lineups of the suspects to the gang's victims, hoping they can identify their attackers.
Take your time.
Detective Sergeant Tom Berry.
The bad thing that we ran into is the victims could not identify them. They were in masks, everything went by in a flash, they put them down on the floor. They could not identify them.
Another set.
The inability of witnesses to pick out their attackers hurts the case.
Take your time.
Special Agent Michael Kusanovich.
No. We don't have enough information to conduct search warrants, to make any arrests. All we have is one individual who's providing information. What we're now looking for is additional fresh information to allow us to go further in the investigation.
The task force asks a federal judge for permission to use wiretaps. If they can prove that there is an ongoing pattern of felonies by the gang, they can take down the entire organization on federal racketeering charges.
And apparently he's also one who has trained this gang.
A few days later, in the early morning hours of September 4th, 1994, police respond to a report of shots fired at an illegal after-hours gambling house. It is owned by Andre Woods, one of the gang's leaders. They interview witnesses and piece together what happened. At 4:30 in the morning, Andre Woods got into an argument with a few of the gamblers.
It got out of hand. He didn't like, they disrespected him. Gunned him down, cold blood. Just wiped out, 4 human lives in a second. He just kind of walked out. That's just the way he was. Got in his Mercedes-Benz and took off.
The task force provides Detroit Homicide with information on Woods and his car. Homicide detectives use the information to alert law enforcement nationwide in an all-out effort to find the fugitive.
Obviously, this caused us to try and speed up our efforts to obtain these wiretaps because we had demonstrated to us the propensity for extreme violence. If if Woods was willing to commit a quadruple homicide, we felt that they wouldn't be afraid to commit homicides if necessary in the commission of the home invasions.
5 days after the quadruple homicide, a judge grants the task force permission to monitor the pagers of several of the gang members. They begin collecting phone numbers and discover a consistent pattern of calls between them. It shows further evidence of the gang's organization. A week later, the unimaginable happens. Fugitive Andre Woods strolls into Detroit Police Headquarters.
Ray walked in and said, "Hey, I hear you guys are looking for me."
Police believe Woods turned himself in because the manhunt was getting too hot. He thought it would be easier to fight the charges in court. FBI Special Agent Bob Pertuso is glad to have Woods off the streets.
Because he was so violent, he was an enforcer for the gang, and if Woods was still out, there was a great potential for more people to get hurt.
A week after Andre Woods surrenders, the task force uses the evidence from the pagers to get its first telephone wiretap on the remaining gang leader, O.B. Carter.
We were hoping to be able to identify past home invasions, proceeds of those robberies, and most of all, identify future home invasions so that we could prevent them or catch these individuals in the act.
The task force also places Carter under surveillance by a Detroit police crew that includes Officer Steve Miller.
The guy was really surveillance conscious, so it was a pretty hard target to follow, but we were able to follow him.
The information gathered through surveillance, combined with the evidence from the wiretap, gives investigators further insight into the gang's activities.
We were able to start to watch their moves and start to anticipate as opposed to react. Anticipate where they were going to strike and which members were going to be involved in the next home invasion.
Monitoring phone conversations, they learned to recognize gang members' voices and code words. The gang calls their home invasions licks. Detroit police officer Tom Dunai.
After we kind of knew that they had just got done with a lick, they all get on the phone and start talking about it and laughing about it and telling how much money they got out of a certain house or how many guns they got out of a certain house. Then they would talk about narcotics that they got out of the house.
From these intercepted details of the crimes, investigators are able to connect the gang to specific home invasions.
They weren't very descriptive, but they were descriptive enough where we knew what they were talking about, what they got out of the house. So we were able to match that up with the reports of the victims stating to us what was taken from the house at the time of the home invasion.
But it is still not enough.
We didn't know specifically which individuals in that group had committed the home invasions. We still needed more information, and we really wanted to catch them in the act of committing a home invasion.
One night, a surveillance officer is watching a home where gang members are meeting. Suddenly, an unmarked Detroit police car pulls up. Before surveillance can radio a warning, 4 plainclothes officers jump out and head in the direction of the gang house. Dispatch tells surveillance that the 4 are working on another case, looking for a possible fugitive at the house next door. The officer is worried that the violent gang members don't know it. A Detroit plainclothes arrest team approaches a house, unaware that a vicious gang, armed with automatic weapons, is in the house next door.
Yo, fellas, cops! Get ready.
An officer assigned to surveil the gang watches anxiously, not knowing if the gang will think the officers are coming for them and open fire. After a few tense moments, the officer is relieved to see no indication of a gang response.
Go ahead, play cards, man. Go ahead, man. Take your time.
Later, the joint FBI police task force investigating the gang monitors a wiretap on a gang leader's home. Detroit Police Detective Sergeant Tom Berry learns the gang did in fact know the arrest team was outside.
Apparently they were getting ready to do a home invasion, and a police car pulled up. Home invaders don't know why these cops are out there. They thought they were coming after them. On the wire, what they said is that those cops would have came in here, we would have killed them, just killed them all. That made the hair on our arms stand up.
Detroit police officer Tom Dunai is even more determined to get the gang off the streets as soon as possible.
We started getting enough evidence on these guys via the wiretap that we decided that before somebody actually gets killed here, we need to do something quickly.
But investigators need direct evidence of the gang committing a crime to ensure convictions under federal racketeering statutes.
Taking care of the warrants?
Special Agent Bob Pertuso.
Okay, great.
They would be in possession of their weapons, they'd be wearing their bulletproof vests, they'd be in possession of the goods that they stole.
To protect innocent bystanders, investigators decide to arrest the gang after they leave a home invasion. Special Agent Martin Vandervliet.
We know they're going to be...
We did not want to try and arrest them while they were in the house committing a home invasion and possibly risk a hostage situation.
But taking down this brutal gang will be extremely dangerous.
They had attempted to kill people, rob people, sexually assaulted women. Very violent. In fact, we had developed that information that they had planned to shoot it out with the police when confronted. Very difficult situation.
We know they're going to have vests on. We know they're going to have automatic weapons. There was no doubt in our minds that these people, they weren't going to just throw up their hands and give up. They're going to shoot it out.
You going with me out here for a minute?
Because of the large number of individuals who were involved, as well as the weapons that they were carrying, they were heavily armed with AK-47s, MAC-10s, Uzis, all the dangerous weapons out there in the street. We believed that we needed to use a SWAT team to arrest these individuals.
Agents meet with the SWAT commander who lays out the plan. The tactical squad responsible for making the arrests will hide inside an ambulance.
And be taken down immediately.
With its emergency lights activated, the ambulance will approach the home invader's vehicle from behind as if it were passing. Investigators believe that since the gang will have just committed a home invasion, they will try to remain inconspicuous and pull to the side of the road.
And we're going to ram them with the ambulance. The 20 SWAT guys, all dressed in SWAT gear with bulletproof vests, are going to get out and get a half moon around them. So when they start to get out of the car or the van, we got them contained. We didn't want to get into a chase. That was one of our things we didn't want. That's why we decided to ram them, disable their vehicle. We didn't want to chase.
The final component of the plan requires taking down the rest of the organization.
We knew from past experience that only certain members of that group would be involved. It wouldn't be the whole group. So we had other police persons ready to make arrests at other locations for whoever was not present during that home invasion, as well as to execute 6 search warrants. We had hundreds of agents and police officers involved in our plans for the takedown of this group.
For weeks, the task force works around the clock, monitoring wiretaps, looking for the right opportunity to spring their trap. Then, on November 9th, they hear gang members planning their next home invasion.
When we intercepted conversations about a plan to do it in 2 days, we were at a great tactical advantage. We had our federal search warrant signed, we had the assignments to conduct the searches, and of course the tactical people were actually going to handle the arrest.
Unfortunately, gang members don't mention where the home invasion will be.
We don't know where yet.
The next day, surveillance watches 2 gang members drive through a neighborhood as though scouting for a potential target. The task force now believes they know approximately where the home invaders will strike. Police headquarters, November 11th. With the home invasion only hours away,
Deadly serious.
The task force goes over the plan with team leaders one final time.
Their intent
To underscore the danger the officers face, they play a tape recording of the gang's threat to kill police.
We played that tape for the people who were going to take these people down later on. This is the real deal. We're not playing with these people. These people aren't playing with you. They have no hesitation of killing a police officer. And you can just see the officers just intently staring.
You know what I'm saying?
This is real. These guys are going to kill us.
At this point, we had been investigating this group for several months, and it was a relatively long-term investigation. And I think most of us on the task force wanted to conclude it, wanted to get them arrested. So we were pretty excited. I think the adrenaline level was pretty high, and we really were expecting that this was going to be the conclusion. One way or another, we were going to get these people locked up that evening.
SWAT gives Officer Steve Miller and the rest of the surveillance teams armor-piercing ammunition for their handguns in case the takedown becomes a gunfight.
We knew these guys wore the same kind of armor we wore, you know, exact same stuff in there. And we knew that they were shooting armor-piercing rounds out of their weapons. So, you know, we had to try to at least be on level par with them.
That evening, surveillance observes the home invaders traveling in 2 cars.
They drive to the area they drove the day before. Everybody's tightening up. They drive by the house and they leave. Well, they don't do the robbery. So we're thinking, what the heck's going on?
FBI Special Agent Martin Vandervliet follows the gang from a distance.
We didn't want to get too close because we didn't want to risk these individuals seeing police in the area and possibly aborting their raid.
The home invaders enter a dark alley and suddenly cut their headlights. They disappear into the darkness, making it impossible to tell whether they parked or continued through the alley.
We're not panicking, but where the heck are they at? Where the heck are they at?
Police cannot move in for a closer look without potentially blowing their cover. If the home invaders get away, they will be free to commit another heinous crime. The FBI and Detroit police tail a gang of violent home invaders, hoping to catch them in the act. Authorities are anxious to bring closure to a 6-month investigation.
Here we go.
I'll be cool.
Yeah, just lay back here. Lay back here.
Just be cool.
But when the home invaders cut their headlights, police lose them. Minutes later at the operations center, Detroit Detective Sergeant Tom Berry learns from 911 that the gang has struck again.
Home invasion just happened. 6 guys in masks dressed as police officers. They robbed the wrong house, got nothing out of it. We got 2 victims that are both almost 70 years old. Can't identify.
Since the home invaders did not steal anything, investigators decide not to make any arrests. There's simply no evidence to tie the gang to the crime.
We can't prove our case, so we sit and we wait.
Agents and officers scour the area looking for the home invaders. A Detroit police surveillance officer doubles back to the gang's meeting place, thinking they will return there after the invasion. When he arrives, he sees them coming out of the house, dressed in their raid clothes and getting into a van. It appears that the gang is heading out for another robbery. When gang members are dropped off at a house, Miller is right behind them.
I ducked into a nice little parking space where I could see the front of the house and I could see the van. I adjust my mirrors, you know, and get in my surveillance mode.
Finally, authorities are in position to actually see the home invaders commit a crime.
So the game plan was, they do the robbery, we can't stop it. If we go in, you risk hostages. We don't want hostages. We want nobody to get hurt.
Suddenly, Officer Miller notices the home invaders' van creeping up behind him.
My heart starts pounding, I'm like, this guy saw me. I got my weapon in my hand, and just in case anything happens, I gotta be ready. He just cruised by me.
The van pulls up to the house.
These guys came running out, just all kind of stuff in their hands, and they all jumped into the van.
With a confirmed invasion, the task force puts their arrest plan into motion.
Now we're ready to go. Now we're going to take them down. We turn it over to the SWAT team.
An ambulance loaded with SWAT personnel approaches the gang's van and attempts to disable the vehicle by ramming it. But at the last second, the van speeds up and the ambulance cannot make a strong hit. The van, which has more horsepower, easily gets away from the SWAT team. FBI Special Agent Martin Vandervliet.
We obviously had a major problem. We had 6 highly armed individuals in a van, and we had to stop them.
Surveillance teams begin pursuing the van, knowing the chase will likely end in a gun battle. FBI Special Agent Bob Pertuso.
Whenever you have armed robbers running from the police, wearing bulletproof vests, armed with automatic weapons, once they broke through the attempts by the police to stop them, there was going to be a confrontation, absolutely.
Officer Miller and the other pursuit vehicles continue to chase the van through the streets of Detroit. Suddenly, the van's rear doors open and the gang begins shooting at law enforcement. A SWAT sniper inside one of the chase cars returns fire. At police headquarters, Officer Tom Dunai continues to monitor the chase.
It was amazing because of what had happened, how controlled the officers were in the street. There wasn't any panic, but people were screaming shots are being fired. We even heard gunfire over the radio. That's how strong it was. And in my heart, I was scared for the officers at that point.
Just stay with them.
The chase continues for several miles. Then, inexplicably, the van stops.
4 guys bail out the van. They're firing at me, and I jump out my car, and I fire one shot. I get one shot off with my 9mm, and it jammed. Natural instinct was just, these guys aren't getting away. Let me chase these guys.
SWAT officers order the remaining 2 home invaders to exit the van. But the van takes off, and the chase continues, leaving Miller alone to pursue the heavily armed suspects.
It was like I could feel the bullet going by. To this day, I can't explain to you why I didn't get shot. I say, okay, police, we got you surrounded, come out.
Miller thought other officers were following behind him. He suddenly realizes he's all alone.
And it's like a ghost town. I mean, nobody there.
Even worse, he does not know where his attacker has gone. The FBI and Detroit police engage in a running gun battle with a violent home invasion gang. Officer Steve Miller narrowly escapes an ambush. When backup arrives, Miller begins searching for his attacker.
We start going up eastbound on Pasadena, just checking. Sure enough, get about 5 houses up, and this guy is laying face down. So I'm like, okay, get up, get up. And, he wasn't moving, kind of lifeless, so I reached around the field, to see if I could get a pulse from him.
He's dead. He's dead.
He's later identified as Obie Carter, the gang's leader. A subsequent autopsy concludes that Officer Miller's first shot, an armor-piercing round, punctured Carter's bulletproof vest and fatally wounded him. Miles away, the police chase comes to an abrupt end when the gang's van breaks down. The two remaining home invaders jump out of the van. One surrenders, but the other will not go down without a fight. FBI agents pursue the fleeing gunman. Searching down a dark alley, Special Agent Bob Pertuso sees a dark shape and carefully approaches.
The getaway driver was lying on the ground. He had been shot a number of times.
The agents call for an ambulance.
Down. Need an ambulance.
The getaway driver is taken to a hospital and, against all odds, survives. Following a series of fierce gun battles, the task force assesses the casualties.
Okay.
Hundreds of shots were fired. Incredibly, no one on the arrest team was hit.
In their 70s.
Our plan worked.
Unknown or injured.
Did not anticipate the high-speed chase and the violent confrontation, but it happened. It was dealt with effectively.
Okay.
But only 3 of the 6 gang members involved in the chase have been apprehended. Detroit police officer Tom Dunai tries to locate them.
Detective Barry here.
What I had done was call local hospitals to find out if anybody was admitted with a gunshot wound. And we called around a few hospitals. We had a hit at one hospital, and they says, oh yeah, somebody just came in with multiple gunshot wounds.
At the hospital, Dunai confirms the gunshot victim is one of the fugitives. As the search for the remaining 2 gang members continues, FBI agents, the FBI SWAT team, and local police serve search warrants on 6 of the gang members' houses. They find critical evidence, according to FBI Special Agent Martin Vandervliet.
Well, we found a lot of evidence that had been taken from robberies, including specific items of clothing, jewelry, and then we also recovered a great amount of weapons. A lot of the houses would have 3 to 5 guns in them, as well as ammunition, vests, pry bars, masks, and other things.
At Detroit Police Headquarters, Detective Sergeant Tom Berry questions the captured members of the home invasion gang. He lets them know they are facing long prison terms and that those who cooperate first may get reduced sentences.
Probably 95% of them told us exactly what happened. That's how we were able to identify the rest of the gang, the rest of the peripheral players.
Over the following months, the task force systematically arrests gang members. In the end, a total of 29 are convicted and sentenced on federal or state charges in the biggest home invasion prosecution to date.
This particular task force, it was the first major task force between the FBI and the Detroit Police Department. We wanted to do a good job for those victims. We made a difference. We really made a difference to the city of Detroit. We did make it a safer place.
Well, it just goes to show you that when law enforcement agencies can work together smoothly with the right people, anything can be accomplished.
Thanks to the collaborative efforts of the Detroit Police Department and the FBI, the violent home invaders gang is dismantled forever.
The following program is rated 14+ and may contain coarse language, violence, nudity, mature subject matter, or scenes which may not be suitable for all viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
A brutal home invasion. A young woman gunned down in her prime, and a decade-long search for the truth.
This was a very intimate, strange killing.
With two possible stories and conflicting evidence for each.
If there's so many small lies, what are the bigger lies out there?
Forensic evidence usually proves what happened, but sometimes it has to prove what did not.
Financial documents don't lie. People lie.
Oh my goodness, he tried to frame an innocent man for this.
Every crime scene tells a story. It begins just after sunrise on a residential street in St. Paul, Minnesota.
State Patrol 911.
Someone's trying to break into my house.
What city are you in, St. Paul?
I'm in St. Paul.
Hang on just a second.
The caller is 25-year-old homeowner Heidi Furcus.
She's scared. She is a bit confused.
What address are you at?
1794.
1794 what?
1794 Minnehaha Avenue.
Heidi screamed, and then the call goes dead.
Well, I don't know where she went there.
Just over 1 minute after Heidi's call ends, another 911 call comes in.
State Patrol 911. Somebody has broken out. Okay, are you in St. Paul, sir?
It's Nick Furcus, Heidi's 27-year-old husband.
You've been shot?
Yes, please.
Okay, stay on the phone with me, okay?
Nick is screaming and asking for help. He's been shot, and it's very clear that he's in a lot of pain.
Is the person that shot you still there?
No.
Take a deep breath and listen to me. What race was he?
I don't know.
Okay, do you remember what he was wearing?
I don't know.
Are you the only one that's injured?
No, my wife, I think she's good.
He says his wife has been shot.
Nick?
911 stays on the phone with him while they dispatch police. And police arrive 6.5 minutes later.
Okay, Nick, you can hang up the phone.
House looks totally calm from the outside. They open the door and they can immediately smell the gunshot powder still in the air. In the kitchen, they see Heidi on the floor, on her back with Nick next to her. He's unable to walk.
Nick is rushed to the hospital. Sergeant Jim Gray is the first lead investigator on the case.
When I went inside of the residence, we saw the shotgun that is laying on the floor in the foyer area.
The double-barreled shotgun is just inside the door, next to a small table.
On this table, there's a water bottle, there is a receipt, a beer bottle. Past the front entryway, they see a pair of jeans that are partially pulled out.
And then further ahead, Heidi was laying deceased.
Heidi was shot almost square in the back. Her spinal cord is severed. She falls straight down. She's paralyzed. So where she is essentially where she was shot.
Heidi's declared dead, but Nick isn't told yet. He's being treated for a gunshot to his upper left thigh. His injury is not life-threatening. A St. Paul police officer goes to the hospital to speak with Nick.
They do a 15-minute recorded interview.
Nick, can you tell me exactly what happened?
Yeah. I got up to go to the bathroom or get a glass of water. I heard somebody fiddling with the front door. I woke up Heidi to have her call the police. I grabbed my shotgun out of the closet.
When you were doing this, where were you?
Up in our master bedroom.
Nick told us that he was bringing the jeans because his wallet was inside the jeans. They went downstairs to exit the house towards the back door.
And then we decided we were going to run to the garage and just get out of the house.
But before they could do that,
the intruder got in.
The door opened up and Heidi kept going, and I turned, got grabbed.
Nick and the intruder then wrestled over the double-barreled shotgun.
We were kind of both holding onto the gun.
And as they wrestled for the shotgun, it discharged.
And that's when Heidi fell down.
Nick and this intruder continued to wrestle for control of the shotgun. And then that's when it went off a second time and struck Nick in his thigh.
And then this burglar ran out of there and disappeared. And Nick then somehow got himself over to Heidi and called the police.
Can you describe who you saw?
All I saw was a guy in a hooded sweatshirt, pulled low, maybe sunglasses on or something. He might have been black, but I'm not 100% certain.
Could you guess how tall he was?
Over 6 feet.
What else can you describe from him?
Gloves.
We did not have a lot of information about the intruder initially.
The first officers really spent a lot of time trying to talk to neighbors, trying to see if anyone saw anything.
But nobody reports seeing anything or anyone that morning. What is clear, the community's sense of shock, fear, and grief over Heidi Firkus's death.
She was one of those people that brought so much positive energy and light into a room that people remember that and appreciated it.
She was faith-filled, sounded like sunshine and happiness for all of those that were around her. This was a very intimate, strange killing that involved a home invasion burglary. And the intruder being out there that committed this crime was very scary for our residents.
The search for evidence of the intruder begins.
We had already contacted our crime lab to have them come out to help us process the scene.
They swab that table, they swab the door. They collect possible fingerprints. They do an examination of the shotgun. They do notice a fiber by that trigger guard of the shotgun, a blue cloth fiber.
We analyzed the door extensively, looking at tool marks, looking at the lock mechanism and see, did it look like somebody had forced their way in?
They do see some marks on the frame around the door.
As CSIs process the scene and collect evidence for analysis, Nick is released from the hospital and meets with Sergeant Gray at the police station.
This is the same room where Nick and I had our conversation. It's definitely a flashback.
Sergeant Gray begins by asking about Nick and Heidi's relationship.
You guys have any problems or anything like that? Just the normal stuff, like, stresses about finances, but I would say we're still best friends.
With regards to the relationship, nothing really stood out. He didn't think that Heidi was seeing anybody, and Nick denied seeing anybody else.
You guys aren't behind in the bills or anything? We are behind in the bills. We foreclosed on our house. Okay.
They actually owed more on the house than it was actually worth at the time.
We have to be out by Monday. Tomorrow.
Nick and Heidi's eviction from their house was set for 12 noon, the day after Heidi's murder.
When Nick told the police about that, I think they were very surprised.
There was food in the refrigerator, clothes were still hung up in the closets. I thought it was extremely weird. The house was impeccable, that there was nothing packed up, nothing boxed up. The foreclosure was obviously something that we wanted to look into, and he was only giving us the tip of the iceberg when it came to that.
Do you have any questions for me, Nick? Well, I just want to know the final answer on Heidi.
We're about an hour and a half into our conversation, and that's when he finally asked me about whether or not Heidi survived her injuries.
There's a couple parts of my job that I really hate, and this is one of them.
We did not want to tell Nick that his wife had passed away because sometimes a witness or victim can tend to, for lack of a better word, lose it.
She didn't make it. I figured that.
And I figured I'd give him some time to be alone so that he could grieve in peace. I wanted to see what his reaction was going to be. Once I told him that, he did not cry at all. Not what we normally would experience, something like this, where we would have people openly weeping, crying, screaming, and yelling, those kinds of things.
At the end of the interview, police have one final question for Nick.
Do you have anything to do with this? No, absolutely not. Okay. Absolutely not. All right. Why is there a party that wants to ask that?
Well, Nick, I'm a police officer, okay?
Yeah.
I gotta ask the tough questions, all right? Nick's answer, I always equated that to a weak denial. Nick's not a man that would express his emotions, but when Nick's family came into the room, he started overtly crying and then gave his mother a hug and was, crying into her shoulder.
Nick is free to go home with his family.
We are just trying to gather as much information from him as possible because Nick is a victim and he is also a witness, and it is his wife that died in this incident.
So as a matter of protocol, detectives must look into Nick's background, starting with his interview.
We were trying to follow up on the information that Nick provided to us during our conversation about the foreclosure.
They began to gather all kinds of bank statements and mortgage documents and insurance documents and loan payment information.
Aside from the foreclosure, their finances seem like that of any other young couple struggling to make ends meet. There are no red flags.
General financial strain does not come across as a regular common occurrence for a motive for homicides that we see.
Investigators soon learn that Nick has no criminal record. He runs a division of his father's company, and he's admired by his friends and family.
Nick was described wonderfully by many of his friends. He was a leader in their church. Everybody said that he was a great person to be around.
His marriage to Heidi is also reported to be rock solid. Nick even signs over Heidi's small life insurance payout to her family.
By all accounts, it seemed like a very loving marriage. Nick very much doted on Heidi. They met in the church group. He gained a lot from that relationship because of how much she touched everyone's life. Heidi was close with a lot of people, also very kind of loyal and caring.
Both Nick and Heidi's friends and families rally around Nick.
Nick was obviously receiving support from both his side of the family as well as Heidi's family.
But even though Nick seems like a solid witness, police still investigate whether his story can be backed up by the forensic evidence.
I'd had issues with some of the things that he brought up during our conversation. I'm at the front door, so let me know. We decided to recreate the doorknob jiggling at the house.
We're in the bedroom looking at the hallway.
Because it was one of those things that kind of stuck out in my head, that if you're upstairs, are you really going to be able to hear somebody messing around with the front door? Sergeant Wright and Sergeant Shackle could not hear me manipulate the front of the doorknob while they were upstairs like Nick said he could.
To police, the initial evidence doesn't quite line up with what Nick told them. They decide to go back to him for more details. Only there's a problem.
Nicholas Firkus, his family comes from quite a bit of money, and almost immediately he hired a private attorney.
And that defense attorney let us know that if we had to speak with Nick, we could do it through him. It was Nick's right to do what he wants. We obviously had more questions.
Nick and his lawyer refuse to answer them.
Hi.
How you doing? Call Josh. Shake Shackles.
I'm Mike Gross.
But they do help police in a significant way. 2 weeks after Heidi's murder,
we were notified that Nick and his defense team had made a sketch of the intruder and that they were willing to turn over a copy of that sketch that was created with his private sketch artist.
The sketch is their strongest lead to date. It's released far and wide in the hopes that someone will recognize the intruder and break the case wide open.
That's obviously exciting for the police department because that gives us something to go on. That gives us someone to find. It gives us something to research, something to do.
We got a few leads and we did follow up on those, but nothing came to fruition for us.
As the year goes by, detectives hope the case will move forward when the forensic results from the scene come in.
At that time, the fingerprint process and the DNA process was quite lengthy. We did not get DNA back in this case until almost a year later.
The results don't give investigators much to work with.
It's only Nick's DNA on that shotgun. And inside the house, there were no other fingerprints. aside from Nick and Heidi's.
The results from the fiber found on the firearm are also inconclusive.
They can't say exactly, but it could have come from the jeans.
On the front door, there's no third-party DNA nor fingerprints either. Since the intruder was wearing gloves, this isn't a surprise, but it's a disappointment. Desperate, investigators return to the only real evidence of the intruder they have, the sketch.
Police every year around the time of Heidi's death would put this in the paper, and any tip they got, they investigated.
But none of the tips lead to the intruder, and the case goes cold. Meanwhile, Nick starts dating again.
Nick met someone else. He moved on.
He was friends with my sister, and so we would hang out all the time. I just was like, oh, I can trust this person. He's kind to me. We had a friendship for a while before we started dating. We ended up getting married in August of 2012.
But marriage to Nick comes with rules.
He did not talk about Heidi. He was told not to say anything. His parents sat us down and kind of gave us just what we do, what we don't do when we're in this family. One of those things was talking to media.
But Heidi's family does the opposite. 4 years after her murder, they team up with the police and the media in an attempt to re-energize the investigation.
A St. Paul family spent the last 4 years praying police would find their daughter's killer. Now they're asking the public for help.
Heidi's mom and dad were very patient, very loving, very kind, but I think that they started to reach a point where they didn't want to be silent any longer because they were looking for answers and looking for information.
It's been difficult because of the way that Heidi was taken.
There were some suspicions within Heidi's family and that Nick was potentially hiding something about the financial situation.
Well, it's certainly the biggest challenge we've ever faced. There's these other layers to that we're hoping to get some relief from.
Police now want to talk to her husband again, but they say the husband doesn't want to talk to them.
And we know there's at least one person, if not more, that knows exactly what happened.
When you say at least one person, are you talking about Mr. Firkus?
Well, we would love to sit down with Mr. Firkus again if he ever desires to do so.
Police want to ask Nick about the inconsistencies in his story about the intruder and whether Heidi knew about the foreclosure. Her family says she didn't.
Her family was very clear. No one in her family did she tell about this foreclosure. That was completely contrary to anything in Heidi's personality or the way she conducted any part of her life.
On the advice of his lawyer, Nick continues to stay silent. Instead, Nick's lawyer responds publicly.
There was a lot of press in the paper, and there were comments from his attorney that they had evidence and proof that Heidi Firkus knew about this eviction and lockout that was coming the day after her murder.
But Heidi's family doesn't believe it. As they continue to question Nick's foreclosure story, the investigation takes a surprising turn.
We received a phone call, and it was a very exciting day. I remember it very clearly that a woman had called, and she said, I know who's in that sketch. She said that he frequented our downtown Skyway system, and she said his name was Michael Pye.
Armed with the name of the intruder who killed Heidi Firkus, investigators jump into action. They learn he has a long rap sheet, and in 2015, when the tip comes in, Michael Pye is in jail.
He was incarcerated for breaking into homes and committing burglaries early in the morning in the same community where Heidi was killed. And when we started to look at his booking photographs, it was unmistakable. There was no doubt that this sketch was of Michael Pye.
It is uncanny how identical it is. The eyes, the face, the nose, it's exactly Michael Pye.
I could not wait to go talk to him. We scheduled an appointment with the Department of Corrections so we could get up there and interview him. We introduced ourselves to Mr. Pye, and we told him who we were and why we were there, and he said something about, I've never killed anybody. I pulled out the sketch, and I remember him just staring at the sketch and saying, that's me.
Except it's not.
Michael Pye was in prison at the time of the murder.
We have jail records, video evidence, and everything else that shows There was no way that he was the intruder.
It's a huge setback. But now investigators want to know, how did Nick Firkus come up with such a detailed sketch of a real burglar who was in jail?
And what they found was his picture and news articles were prominently in the paper around that time.
It's not hard to make the guess that that sketch was made based upon a newspaper clipping where his photograph was in the news, and that it was created possibly in an effort to set him up or frame him.
And that man, now out of prison, spoke tonight.
If I wouldn't have been locked up, I would have had a murder case.
After Mr. Pye was cleared and the intruder was removed from the possibilities list, we started to narrow the focus more on Nick. It was at that time that we started to delve more into the financial records and the history in their past.
Over the course of the investigation, detectives had gathered hundreds of pages of financial documents and correspondence. They bring in Kevin Sullivan of the Financial Intelligence Unit to help them make sense of it all.
Heidi was not there to tell the story. We had to use these documents to tell the story of what happened in the last 4 years of their marriage. People lie, but a bank statement doesn't lie. Financial documents don't lie. They're the best informants out there.
Sullivan uses the documents to create a timeline of the couple's financial activity.
So this is the timeline of the activity from 2003 to Heidi's death in 2010. Nick and Heidi were married in 2005. 2007, in August, they buy a house. All of a sudden, things started changing. Within a year, we're $17,000 in debt on that credit card. Then the next month, they stop paying the mortgage.
Their last mortgage payment is September 2008, 19 months before Heidi's murder.
By June, the house is no longer theirs.
The house has been foreclosed on. They're both summoned to court to set an eviction date.
Even though Heidi works just a block or two away, he says she's not available.
The issue here is Nick is the only one who signs this document. Heidi was not at the hearing.
In fact, Heidi's signature was nowhere to be found.
Was there anything in any of the documents indicating that Heidi had communicated with the banks? No. Had she signed anything? No.
He's the only one who signed paperwork after their mortgage. When people ask, where did the money go? Nick just became incredibly irresponsible. It just went to general spending.
Investigators conclude that Heidi was completely unaware of their financial situation. As police try to determine what else Nick might have lied about, his second wife Rachel starts to have questions of her own.
I first started to notice him lying about small things, normal medical bills that weren't getting paid. Collections would call me. I would ask him about it, and he would just say things like, well, I tried to call them, but they're not calling me back, or the bank messed things up. If there's so many small lies, what are the bigger lies out there? I just started to do my own investigating, I guess. I would search drawers, I would search his closet, and so I would just dig through his stuff. And honestly, I didn't know what I was looking for. And then I found that letter that said we hadn't paid our property taxes and that we were going to be foreclosed on in 2020. Looking at a paper that said you were going to be foreclosed on and knowing his past terrified me because history was repeating itself.
After Rachel discovered that Nick had been lying to her, she snuck out of the house.
I just knew that he killed Heidi.
Eight years after Heidi's murder, Rachel Firkus files for divorce from Nick. When St. Paul police hear about the proceedings, they reach out to her hoping she'll talk. She's hesitant at first, but agrees.
I will share my story, and it's very similar, and it doesn't look good for him.
Nick had a pattern that he lied about the finances, he mismanaged their finances. He did this obviously with Heidi as well. Once we spoke to Rachel, I really said, we need to get all of our ducks in a row.
Easier said than done.
For years, it was very suspicious, but there's a difference between believing someone's a suspect and having enough evidence to arrest them and convict them in court. And we didn't want to get it wrong. We didn't want to do the family an injustice by not having enough evidence.
So police bring in the FBI.
St. Paul Police Department reached out and said, hey, we would like to take another look at this case.
The FBI begins their analysis with the first piece of evidence collected in the case, Heidi's 911 call.
The 911 call was pretty telling for me, hearing Heidi's last 38 seconds of her life.
You hear a loud bang, Heidi scream, and then the call goes dead.
We think, because of the sound of it, that it was a gunshot. And what was important about that call was what you hear and what you don't hear.
If an intruder had broken in the door, if there was a fight going on in the doorway, how come you can't hear that on the phone?
We never heard any sign of any third party in that room.
Nick called 911 from the same spot and same phone as Heidi, yet his call plays differently. The FBI couldn't hear the intruder, but they could hear the police.
You hear the police enter that front door area.
We're able to clearly hear officers responding. So that was a big red flag for us.
Even though Nick's story is beginning to fall apart, police need more than the 911 calls to bring him to justice.
We're trying to disprove a fictitious intruder, and so to do that, we need to look at any forensic thing that we missed in terms of ballistic examination.
They turn to the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. The BCA is the state crime lab and conducts firearm examinations. One question they consider, is it possible for a loaded shotgun, like Nick's, to be accidentally fired during a struggle?
This is a side-by-side, double-barreled 20-gauge shotgun. To open it for loading, you push this lever, so you put shot shells into the chambers. Opening the action automatically puts the safety on safe. So if I want to fire the shotgun, I have to push the safety forward. That disengages the safety, and now it's ready to fire.
It's going to require 2 actions to shoot that weapon. And so that's something that Nick never talks about in his interview.
Which is also very telling, because Nick had to have intentionally taken that safety off.
The BCA next examines the ammunition used, which is a type of birdshot.
I'm going to open up one of these shot shells so you can see the components inside.
Birdshot is designed to spread for maximum coverage, to increase the chance of hitting small targets. The greater the spread, the further away the target is.
The shot and this shot cup and wad assembly will be all together. And as you travel downrange, the shot cup pretty quickly pulls away from the column of shot itself to expand as designed as it travels away from the shot.
As it travels, that wadding starts to lose speed and the shot starts to take over.
The wadding falls to the ground as the pellets travel away from the shotgun.
Pellet spread gets bigger and bigger and less dense and less dense.
But in Heidi's case, both the wadding and the pellets were lodged in her back.
So it led us to believe that she was rather close to the shotgun when it was discharged.
To find out how close, Nat Perlson conducts distance tests at the firing range.
And then we'll place a target at a known distance from the muzzle of the shotgun. We're going to use this remote shooting cart to hold the shotgun and be able to witness the pattern that the shot leaves at the different known distances we'll test.
The pattern that was on Heidi was rather tight.
The first test is to fire the weapon from a distance of 1 foot.
So this is the shot pattern at 1 foot, 1 hole. It's probably about the dimensions of the end of the barrel. We're gonna back it up so we have a further distance, 3 feet. It's right around 3 feet. And see what pattern we get with that.
At 3 feet, the shot pattern is already visibly different.
Kind of see the shape of individual shot at the very periphery here. A little bit of separation of shot from that main mass.
The target is then backed up to 9 feet.
And on this final shot, we actually have a shot all the way outside that main pattern. 5.5, 6 inches at the widest.
Agent Perlson determines the muzzle was less than 9 feet away from Heidi when it was fired by comparing this shot pattern to the one on her body. This distance will help police determine where the shooter must have been standing to shoot Heidi in the back. Investigators reanalyze the crime scene to see if they can confirm how the struggle played out.
That entryway is very small. When you look at the photos, they almost give an impression that it's a little bigger than it actually is. And so the FBI helped us find a way to recreate the scene.
The FBI returns to the Firkus home with a Faro scanner, a specialized laser device used to build an exact digital replica of the scene, accurate to the millimeter.
This is essentially the first floor of the house. Being able to measure everything as precise as we were helps us kind of determine where at the maximum distance is it possible somebody could be standing at that 9-foot mark, which was our extreme end of our ballistics, where that shotgun would be in space.
The Heidi model is positioned in the middle of the house, exactly where the real Heidi was shot dead. With the help of the medical examiner's report, which had already confirmed the angle and height of the bullet entry, they can determine the area where the gun should have been when it went off.
As you turn the victim side to side, you see how the pattern of that shotgun moves from side to side. That's the area that shotgun has to be in to inflict that wound in her back and not impact the door jamb or any other obstacle in its way.
No pellets were found in the door jamb nor anywhere else near Heidi. It was a clear shot. Agent Riley next focuses on the height the gun would have been held at to make that shot.
As we bend Heidi backwards, you see where that shotgun would have to be to represent the wound in her back, and this is not a natural position for anyone to be standing. And then if we bend her forward, even just a little bit, you can see how high that shotgun gets in the room, which tells us that's really the limits of that vertical path on that shotgun. And that shotgun has to be pretty parallel to the ground at the level of his shoulders when it goes off.
The digital model shows her shooter could not be as tall as Nick said he was when first asked.
Could you guess how tall he was?
Over 6 feet.
And now we stick a person of the same size as Nick. This is what we find. That weapon is at the same height as if it's shouldered and aiming it at a target.
The digital model confirms that someone around 5 feet 8 inches, Nick's height, took a clear and steady shot. Investigators are now certain Nick murdered Heidi. The one thing that's still missing is motive. Why would Nick kill his wife?
Why didn't he go to his parents, who were quite well off, and ask for help? That was the burning question that I had in the back of my head.
Nick Firkus is now the only suspect in his wife Heidi's murder. But by all accounts, he had no reason to kill her.
Nick's motive was not obvious.
Investigators returned to Kevin Sullivan's analysis.
This is the document that states an absolute time that they would be evicted on April 26 at noon, which is the day after Heidi was murdered.
This was going to be a really public eviction. The sheriff was going to come on a busy street in front of all the neighbors. They were going to see Heidi and Nick being kicked out of their home, the locks changed publicly, with nothing moved.
There was no coincidence that they were about to lose their house the day after Heidi was murdered. So it wasn't the fact that he was going to lose the house, but it was the years of lies in front of it. This is where it's building up. This is the point where you're going to get caught, the end of this paper. And he knew that.
The motive is he didn't want to be viewed as a failure. He didn't want to be seen as losing in this game of life.
The family and friends were all going to find out. Heidi was going to find out. And his entire world was about to collapse.
With both a motive and forensic evidence proving that there couldn't have been an intruder, police have their own theory of what happened the early morning of April 25th, 2010.
Nick woke Heidi up, told Heidi someone's breaking in.
Nick goes downstairs with the gun concealed in a pair of jeans.
Nick was trying to transport the shotgun in a way Heidi would not know what was going on.
We think Nick was somewhere in the house, secluded.
Police believe Nick was hiding in the living room.
When Heidi came downstairs, she got on the phone.
Someone's trying to break into my house.
And when he found that she was on the phone, I think that surprised him.
Nick steps out, pulls that shotgun out of the pants, which is why the pants are tossed right there. We have that one pant leg of the jeans pulled out, aims and shoots and kills Heidi. Nick walks over, checks that she's dead, picks up her phone, and what he does first, according to her cell phone records, is he's going through her call log to see who she's called and realized she'd called 911, and that's when things unraveled for him.
What's that do? That sets his clock, because he knows the cavalry's coming.
He then goes back to the front door and shoots himself in the leg to make the intruder story sound more plausible.
If you're gonna shoot yourself with a 20-gauge shotgun, where would be a safe place to do so? This is the best place, and you could inflict a wound here and be pretty safe that you're not gonna hit an artery or something that could kill you.
Nick comes back and calls 911.
11 years after Heidi's murder, authorities finally make a move against Nick.
Yesterday morning, Nicholas Firkus was arrested and charged with second-degree intentional murder for the death of Heidi Firkus.
Her parents were actually at the press conference with police today, didn't speak, but released a statement saying they hope this will get them closer to the truth and justice.
With Nick charged with Heidi's murder, prosecutors can finally demand answers.
We do not believe that Heidi knew of this foreclosure.
For over 10 years, Nick's lawyers claimed they had proof Heidi knew about the eviction. Now they must share it with the prosecution.
I was ready, turn it over, let's see what it is. And they said they don't have it. There is no document. There never was a document that showed that Heidi knew.
In January 2023, Nick Firkus's jury trial begins.
There was not a single seat open.
The family of Heidi Firkus packed the courtroom for this morning's hearing.
There were people sitting on the floor. There was an overflow room. Friends and family on both sides. It was like an ugly wedding where it's like you pick a side.
Guilty or not guilty? Not guilty.
With Nick still claiming innocence, the prosecution needs the forensic evidence to do two things. One, to prove what does not exist.
The job was to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there wasn't an intruder.
And to prove that Nick Firkus was the one who killed Heidi. Nick's defense maintains it was a botched home invasion.
Their big defense is Nick is a wonderful guy. The home was foreclosed anyway, so if he was trying to avoid humiliation, he didn't do it. Our response to that was it was all about the framing of it, right? By the time it came out in the paper that the home was foreclosed on, what also came out is that Nick is a victim of a terrible tragedy, as opposed to Nick is an incessant liar who violated the basic tenets of his marriage with Heidi.
The prosecution counters the botched home invasion theory by focusing on the evidence at the crime scene, using an impressive exhibit built by the FBI.
This is the physical model that the FBI created to explain what the evidence actually shows.
The model of the house was made with the same ferro-laser scanning technology used to create the digital model.
So this is Heidi, the light blue. The dark blue is the height of Nick. And then we have the alleged intruder, which is our gray person. According to Nick's statements, he was about 6 foot, 6'1"-ish.
They used the model in court to show why the fight couldn't have played out the way Nick said it did, and that in fact, there was no fight at all.
The big things that we wanted to try to represent was the swing of the door as you open it. As Nick gets beside the door pops open. So this person coming through the door blind would have to grab that shotgun, and then the momentum would take him into that staircase, which takes him out of the area where that shotgun would have to be to hit Heidi in the place that it did.
She shot kind of right between her shoulder blades, right here.
So that was a big piece. The other piece that's hard to really get is as that shotgun is being fired, the likelihood of that being perfectly level with two people fighting over is just not possible. So if there's a fight, very unlikely that it would hit anywhere other than a wall or in this area here because of the momentum the intruder would have coming through the door.
Prosecutors then address another part of Nick's story that doesn't hold up.
Nothing is disturbed.
This is a close-up of that entry table, and there is a life and death struggle happening in this area, according to Nick.
So as they're fighting and they continue to fight, there is a receipt on that end table, and if you imagine a door bursting open and then closing, that hasn't seemed to move at all.
There's no signs that anything has been disturbed.
That's just so improbable, it's impossible.
The defense insists there is solid evidence of an intruder, the tool marks on the door frame.
The police in their investigation, they actually took the door and they took part of the door frame as well. And we have that right here. We actually admitted it into evidence.
A locksmith testifies that the marks predate Heidi's murder.
What he indicated that it looked like it could possibly be was actually a homeowner who might have accidentally locked themselves out. And it's just these like little marks. And as you can see, they're not fresh, they're painted over.
The defense disagrees.
What they wanted to show was that we didn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there wasn't an intruder.
So, to close their case, prosecutors have no choice but to go all out.
She did it right in front of everybody for people to see, which was a very bold move.
A jury is hearing closing arguments for a murder trial in Ramsey County today.
The defense team argues that Nick wouldn't have had time to shoot himself before calling the police. The time between the end of Heidi's 911 call and Nick's call is only 65 seconds.
So in our closing argument, we set up a timer, and we set up a timer for 65 seconds and essentially reenacted it, right? We had the shotgun, my co-counsel fired, walked over, and this is while a giant clock was ticking, then went back over, aimed the shotgun, shot themselves, and then went back over to the body. When we did it during closing argument, we had quite a few seconds left, and then, kind of ended on that.
I think that solidified everything. I mean, after she did that, it was silent. Granted, I wanted to stand up and applaud her.
The jury deliberates for just a few short hours.
You could hear a pin drop in that courtroom because it's coming to an end. You have a family who has lost a daughter forever. None of this should have happened.
A jury found Nicholas Firkus guilty of murdering his wife in their St. Paul home more than 10 years ago.
It's a small relief to Heidi's family.
I really miss my sister. And while I know nothing will replace the void of her not being here, the load is lighter knowing the fight for the truth of her story has been won.
While I understand the jury's verdict and the sentence you must give, I do maintain and will maintain to my dying breath my innocence of this crime.
Nick Firkus is sentenced to life in prison without parole.
The Heidi Firkus case is something that none of us will ever forget because we spent so much time and sweat and tears at times trying to bring justice for her and for her family.
They had lived with Nick's version of events for so long. To finally be able to have the truth was very important to them. Heidi was someone who was very, very loved.
Come on, buddy. Just constantly shot to the face. To the face, boy. Right here on the side. Anybody know anything about it? He's one of the VA prosecutors.
Before 2013, only 11 prosecutors in history had ever been killed in the line of duty. This case changed that number to 13. Prosecutors are aware of the risk that comes with the job, but I think the general public doesn't really think that a prosecutor's job is that risky. I remember one time I was working on a case where I was leaving the courthouse late at night by myself, and that particular case involved the defendant who was in a gang. And the gang members were all outside the courthouse cussing me and calling names, and I thought they could shoot me here, they could follow me home, and I was scared that night. But this case went beyond just being scared and threats. This case involved two very well-respected prosecutors who lost their lives, as well as an innocent bystander who was murdered in cold blood. This put prosecutors all over Texas and all over the country on red alert.
Coffin County 911. Yes, we've got a gentleman on Grove Street and Madison that just got shot.
I know. He got a shot in his face.
I am at the office that morning. I'm sitting at my desk, and I look out the window, and I see two detectives running out to the parking lot. So I called up to dispatch, and I asked, hey, what's going on? The dispatcher told me that they had just had a report of an attorney being shot outside the courthouse.
Come on, buddy. Take your breath.
Upon arrival, there were first responders there that were trying to render aid.
Come on, Mark.
The victim was Mark Hassey from the DA's office.
Come on, buddy. She just constantly shot to the face. To the face, boy, right here on the side.
We had already started kind of cordoning off the area, creating a crime scene. There were a few witnesses there, and there are officers already conducting searches for evidence.
We found out that a silver sedan had been broadcast as the suspect vehicle. So the focus was find this silver sedan. As we are driving through neighborhoods, I came across one of the ladies that worked in the DA's office, and she was getting out of her car. And I said, hey, there's been a shooting. And she looked at me and she's like, I know, it was Mark. And then she told me that he had died. It was just shock. There's just so many unknowns. We don't know why Mark was targeted, and we don't know who we're looking for other than a silver sedan. And so the schools are getting locked down, the courthouse is getting locked down. It was controlled chaos.
He was a good guy. He didn't deserve that. I met Mark Hassey back in the late 90s. I got a job with the district attorney's office in Dallas County. He was representing someone in a family violence case, but he had been a prosecutor in Dallas County before that for quite some time. He's kind of a nerdy guy. He would almost always have a crazy sweater on. And so they're one of those things that you look for. You see somebody walking down the hall wearing a crazy sweater, you know it's Mark Hassey.
Mark had no spouse. Mark had no kids. Mark had a brother a little older than Mark, and then Mark's mother. That was all the family he had. I was a detective for the sheriff's office when Mark came to work for the Kaufman County DA's office. There were 4 felony prosecutors. Mark was one of them. Working with Mark was an amazing experience. When he found out I had an interest in the law, he mentored me. He took the time to really delve into the cases with me.
As a prosecutor in Kaufman County, he really, really had a strong sense of justice. He was a warrior.
My phone blew up with prosecutor friends from North Texas, throughout the nation. This really rattled the prosecutorial community.
When prosecutors all across the country heard about Mark Hassey being shot as he walked to the courthouse, every one of us thought, it's got to be related to work. It's got to be somebody he's prosecuted before. It's got to be somebody he made mad because he went after him. The Kaufman County DA's office couldn't take this on. They couldn't be objective. So someone else had to look at this and decide who did it and can we make that case and prove it. So Kaufman County appointed as special prosecutors from Dallas County.
We were asked very quickly if me and Toby would consider coming out there to help the investigation.
Bill and Toby were immediately called upon to be special prosecutors, so they were able to get to the crime scene while it was still fresh. That's probably a pretty rare thing to have happen.
So Mark would have parked right here with his truck, and he was facing out, got out of his door and started walking over the block to the courthouse. He gets up to the sidewalk, and halfway through this entry, that's when a silver gray car comes in. A handful of eyewitnesses saw different parts of the encounter, and they described a man dressed in black with a mask. And the man in black gets out and confronts him about right here. And eyewitnesses with the man in the body shop.
But that door's open, he was standing right there. We could see them shoving and Mark saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Mark Hasse shot 5 times.
And the final shot was like right there. And Mark drops, and that's the wound that primarily bleeds out on the parking deal.
This witness saw the shooter pull out another gun and start shooting in the air, probably to frighten everyone away.
You know, it's easy to get away with something in broad daylight if you scare everybody and keep their head down. And then the car flees down here, and our civilian's able to follow him for a few blocks before she loses. And she's on the phone with 911. There's a Kaufman patrol officer a few blocks that way working a burglary. Dash cam picks up the gunshots. He hears them, self-dispatches over here. Parks are about right there, so his dash cam is shooting this way. And you can see the last moments of Mark's life. We had no casings around here. So we're figuring he had to be a revolver, which means it's somebody that may be familiar with law enforcement because he doesn't want to leave spent shell casings. The DA, Mike McClellan, gave a press conference very quickly after Mark's murder. And I think all of us that were there or watched it were concerned because Mike was so angry. This hit him so personally that he basically issued a challenge to the murderer.
I hope that the people that did this are watching. We're going to find you. We're going to pull you out of whatever hole you're in and let the people of Kaufman County prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law.
We knew the killer would be watching somewhere. We were just hoping the killer wouldn't take it as a challenge. Mike was super concerned for the safety of his employees, especially as they went in and out of the courthouse on the town square. He would assign some of his police officers to kind of bodyguard people, walk them in and out. Everyone was extra skeptical of people that came through the metal detectors at the front door.
People from all over the state just started flooding in, rangers and troopers, federal agencies, FBI, DEA, ATF, probably 200 agents in Kaufman working this case at one time.
The fact that a prosecutor was gunned down in broad daylight on the steps of the courthouse, of course they're going to bring in everybody that they possibly can to get to the bottom of who did it.
What makes the murder of a prosecutor so different is the suspect pool. Other than the traditional motives where law enforcement is trained to look, we now have additional suspects, which is any case that Mark Hasse's ever prosecuted. So the clues could be buried in the courthouse. They could be in Mark's office. They could be in his files. We need to go back and reinvestigate Mark's cases.
Mark Hasse was a prosecutor for a very long time, and he was handling the highest profile, most serious cases that Kaufman County had. So it could take them years to get to the bottom of all those cases. The investigation had a lot more work to be done. In the months that followed, Kaufman County is still trying to figure out who killed Mark Hasse.
I was home with my family in Dallas looking forward to Easter Sunday, and I got a call from the police chief of Kaufman that said, "Bill, the sheriff wants you out here. Mike and Cynthia McClellan have been found dead in their home."
I hope that the people that did this are watching. We're going to find you. We're going to pull you out of whatever hole you're in.
The district attorney and his wife were killed, and I proceeded straight to the McClellan residence. I locked the scene down.
The immediate assumption was these murders were connected to Mark Hasse. Now we got to figure out what the connection is. We don't know who we're looking for. We don't know if there's other targets. We don't know who's next.
The killer said, "We will not be stopped."
And the black bag was this Grim Reaper mask.
And it had a pickle jar full of homemade napalm.
Even though he looks normal, he is a deadly psychopath. As rare as it is to have a prosecutor killed, to have two from the same office killed within 2 months is unprecedented. Mark Hasse's been killed 2 months earlier. This is his boss and his boss's wife. After Mark Hasse's murder, I wouldn't go anywhere without a gun. I was concerned for the safety of my family.
And I told my wife what was happening, and I gave her 2 guns and said, "If you don't know it's me coming through that door, get ready to use these guns," because we were freaked out.
The district attorney and his wife were killed, and we began the methodical process of handling a major crime scene. I didn't see any signs of forced entry, so the door must have been opened to a known party or opened because there was some type of trickery involved. I noticed that there was quite a bit of firearms-related evidence there. Cartridge cases. Based on just the visual survey, it would have been a semi-automatic rifle, .223 caliber. There was damage from bullet impacts to furniture, walls, as well as the 2 bodies of Mr. McClellan and his wife, and they were both shot multiple times.
McClellan crime scene, way too many rounds were fired just to kill 2 people. There were 20+ rounds fired. It seemed very personal that they probably knew the person that killed them. We were canvassing the neighborhood. We asked, did the neighbors hear the shots? We couldn't find anyone that heard it.
But there was a neighbor a few houses down, and they spotted a white car driving down and then driving back.
This white car is different than the gray sedan seen fleeing Mark Hasse's murder. At this point, the investigators were not sure what to make of that car, but they needed to track it down as soon as possible.
That day, we were all going to meet and go out, and then we got the call later that next day that they had been killed.
I was in shock. I even went so far as to say, okay, y'all, this hasn't really happened. And it wasn't until the funeral home, that it dawns on you that it did happen.
Mike was a fatherly figure in the office, and his wife, Cynthia, would always bring in cookies and baked goods to the office, and very motherly in her interactions with the office staff. When the McClellans were murdered, the enormity of it really hit me. I lost some friends.
The command post opened back up Easter Sunday. We had an anonymous Crime Stoppers tip line. It was web-based, and we got an online tip from someone claiming credit for the murders and said, I shot Mark Hasse, and I used a .38 and a .357. That's somebody that has some knowledge that hasn't been released publicly. So we had a pretty good idea that we were interacting with our actual killer.
The email said, do we have your attention? As a show of good faith, have one of the county judges resign by Friday, or the killings will continue. We will not be stopped.
What was really unique about this tip, it was somebody who was fairly sophisticated at that point with the internet. They were using an IP anonymizer.
That's the program for somebody to start masking their identity online. So it makes it more difficult to trace.
So we were not able to track down the person who wrote the tip. To me, the similarities with Mark Hasse and the McClellans were overkill. Mark Hasse's was shot 5 times with the revolver. Mike McClellan was shot 16 times. Cynthia 4 times with a rifle. And it looked personal. They have to be connected. We found out Mark Hasse and his boss, Mike McClellan, only tried 1 case together, and that was in 2012 when they tried Eric Williams. Eric Williams had been tried for the theft and burglary of computer monitors from the courthouse.
Eric Williams had actually been a commissioned police officer, and then he was elected Justice of the Peace in Kaufman.
Justices of the peace are pretty prevalent in the South. My dad was a JP, and believe it or not, they don't need to be lawyers because Daddy sure wasn't a lawyer. They're elected every 4 years, just like every other government official. They can marry people, but they also deal with traffic tickets, Class C misdemeanors, usually the things where all you have to do is pay a fine. That's what you go see the JP for.
Eric was accused of stealing from the courthouse. Dad approached him and said, hey, resign or I'm going to prosecute this.
He refused. Eric Williams is a very, very smart man, very high IQ. I think he thought he could beat it and went to trial and he got convicted.
The courthouse surveillance footage of a man stealing, seen here, was used in the criminal court case against former Kaufman County Justice of the Peace, Eric Williams, who was convicted in the theft of computer monitors.
You're a JP who's been prosecuted for any kind of theft. You can lose your license, you can lose your livelihood. That's going to devastate your life.
So we made the decision to try to do a knock and talk on Eric Williams to see if he's involved with the murders. We sent 2 officers over to his house, and in fact, when they knocked on the door and said, can we come in and talk with you? And the lawyer that Eric was, he actually said what he was thinking. He narrated his thoughts. I know I shouldn't, but yeah, guys, come on in.
Do you have anything to do with it? No, absolutely not. If you give us the weapons that you own, and look at your house, make sure there's no weapons there. I mean, I don't think that's asking a whole lot if you didn't do anything. But that's not going to stop anything.
Eric let them in, and they saw pieces of AR rifles in the house.
The type of weapon used at the McClellan's murder. Since he was a convicted felon, he could not have any firearms.
So, based on that knock and talk, we were able to get probable cause to search his house. We went in the house. It looked like somebody that's into computers and is on the internet a lot. Law enforcement did a quick download of his computer searches. He was kind of doing surveillance on Hassey and the McClellans. He was running license plates that were connected with the addresses, neighbors' license plates, trying to get a pattern of life. This eagle-eyed investigator we have found a note in his kitchen. It said, this looks like a Crime Stoppers password. The Crime Stoppers tip line was web-based. The system itself is set up to be anonymous. However, the person that gives the tip is assigned a unique password. And when we tracked it back, that's how we knew it was Eric Williams that had sent the tips.
We didn't have enough for capital murder charges. So we had this terroristic threat charge that we had enough evidence to be able to lock up Eric.
Eric Williams' motive seemed like it was revenge-driven because of that trial in 2012. We had pieces of AR rifles and his computer searches, but we didn't have cars and weapons to connect Eric Williams to the murders. The next day, my cell phone goes off, and a friend of Eric Williams calls me. He had seen the coverage of the search warrants, and he goes, I don't know if this is important, but I rented a storage unit for Eric Williams.
I thought, oh my God, it's actually happened. We're going to find something that's linked Eric Williams to those murders.
The command post personnel obtain information from a source that indicates he has rented a storage unit at the request of Eric Williams. So we obtain warrants so that we can enter that storage unit and make a search for evidence that might be related to the murders. There was a lot of stuff crammed into it, but in particular, we found a solid white Crown Vic. It looked like the prototypical law enforcement vehicle. We had received information in the neighborhood that there had been a white vehicle in front of the McClellan's home the morning of their murder. We found law enforcement related memorabilia. We found tons of firearms related evidence, some .38 caliber weapons, quite a bit of boxed ammunition. But what struck me is we found 223 caliber bullets, the same bullets that were fired at the crime scene.
In the storage shed, Eric Williams had ejected a live round into a plastic container, and the tool marks of the ejection site matched the 20 rounds found at the house. That was a smoking gun.
We've got enough now to move forward with capital murder charges. Just the nature of these murders, there's so many moving parts that it was pretty easy for us to believe there had to be more than one person involved. Is there somebody we're missing? People or persons that are guilty of this that haven't hit our radar, because the eyewitnesses from the Hasse murder saw a second person in the car and the shooter getting in the passenger side. So as we're looking at Eric Williams, we're obviously getting information about his wife, Kim Williams. And what we heard from the locals was Kim has bad arthritis. She hardly leaves the house. She takes lots of medicine. We asked Kim Williams to come down to the sheriff's office. She came down voluntarily, and as a part of that, she voluntarily decided to talk to law enforcement. She was talked to by multiple different officers for a long number of hours. Finally, she broke down and gave us that she and Eric were the killers. And that she was the driver on both murders. And Eric Williams actually pulled the trigger himself. Kim Williams told us on the McClellan murders that Eric Williams was dressed as a police officer. And that was his plan, to come up as kind of a SWAT officer, knock on the door and say, there's a shooter in the area, let us in, we're here to protect you. And once she decided to finally tell the truth that she and Eric were involved in these murders, she kind of dropped her head and said, you wouldn't understand. And basically told us that Eric's anger at Mark and Mike for the conviction, she shared that anger. This was a pure revenge killing against the people that had prosecuted them.
Because two Kaufman County prosecutors were murdered, that entire office can't handle this case. They're conflicted out for all kinds of reasons. You're going to have to call in somebody new who's an outsider. And so Bill and Toby were appointed as special prosecutors for Kaufman County. It's a unique position because it's not your home territory, and you have to learn as quickly as possible to do things their way, at the same time bringing all of the knowledge and experience that got you appointed as a special prosecutor in the first place.
We wanted more information from Kim Williams against Eric Williams. Toby and I talked extensively. You never really trust an accomplice unless you can corroborate them.
They had to tread very lightly in figuring out how to handle her, how to deal with her, and how to use her as a potential witness.
We didn't have the murder weapon from the Mark Hasse murder and from the McClellan murders. So when we talked to Kim, she said Eric Williams threw the guns from the Hasse murder into Lake Tawakoni.
So DPS brought in their dive team.
The lake they were searching was just zero visibility. So it's like fingertip searches by feel, kind of in chocolate milk. They were out there probably 30 days total, spread over almost a year of searching. We were hours away from abandoning the search. We're never going to find anything when we got the phone call that the dive team had found guns and a phone. When the guns and the phone came up out of Lake Tawakoni, they were in a black bag. And we didn't think much of the black bag until we dried it out. And the black bag was this Grim Reaper mask. So it had the guns that were used to kill Mark Hasse contained in the killer's mask.
Eric Williams wanted his face disguised from the witnesses, but he also wanted Mark Hasse to be able to recognize exactly who was about to kill him. And that's when witnesses heard Hasse say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, right before he was shot by Eric Williams.
So we knew Kim Williams was at least telling us the truth because everything she told us was corroborated with physical evidence.
Bill and Toby decided to try Eric and Kim Williams separately. When you are trying Eric Williams, from the beginning, it's pretty apparent you're going to need to seek the death penalty because he killed 2 prosecutors. And his wife is also involved, but as a lesser player, and you're not going to seek the death penalty on her. If you're not going to seek death on both of them, they are never going to be tried together. Their trials are always going to be separate.
We had 3 murders and 2 separate incidents. So we put a lot of thought and we went to prosecute the McClellan murders first. Eric Williams' beef was with Mark and Mike. He shot Mark in public by himself. He could have done the same thing to Mike. Instead, he chose to kill Mike at home, knowing Cynthia would be a witness. There was absolutely no reason for Cynthia McClellan to die. So we wanted to try that case first because it was a very strong case for the death penalty.
They charged him with capital murder because they broke into the house. Burglary plus murder equals capital murder. With Mark Hassey, you have to prove the whole retaliation part of it to charge him with capital murder, which is another layer that you have to prove. With the McClellans, you didn't have to even go into that.
There's circumstantial evidence, forensic evidence, fingerprint evidence, ballistic evidence, and finally you will hear a confession this man made to the murders. He sent an email into law enforcement claiming credit for the murders, thinking he would remain anonymous. Well, he was wrong.
When I did the initial opening statement and I termed that email into Crime Stoppers a confession, he got very agitated at the table and was trying to stare me down. But that's because he's a psychopath with a huge ego that thinks he's smarter and he can get himself out of any situation.
Because he'd gotten away with 3 murders. During the trial. But I went very methodically through the evidence, and the 2 key points were the emails about Mark Hassey's murder, where he said the killings will continue. We knew it came from Eric Williams because he left that password for the tip line. The other was the physical evidence found in the storage shed and at the McClellan house.
What conclusions were you able to draw after examining that live cartridge?
That the marks on the case of this cartridge indicate that it was cycled in the same firearm that fired all of the cartridge cases recovered from the crime scene.
We didn't find the actual murder weapon, but it was as good as finding the murder weapon.
We didn't call him Kim Williams because anytime you call an accomplice or a co-defendant in front of a jury, it's an easy cross for a defense lawyer to say Kim Williams was the shooter and not the driver. And we just didn't want to open up that can of worms. We were blessed with so much circumstantial evidence. I asked the jury to consider this. If it's not Eric Williams, then who would it be? No one else fits. No one else has motive. No one else is the common denominator. We felt our case was strong. But anytime you're in front of a jury, you can get somebody that just doesn't want to deliberate. You can get a hung jury 11-1. So something can still go wrong. But the defense in this case was so hamstrung, most of the witnesses were not cross-examined. So they kind of saved their defense fireworks for the closing argument.
Not one fingerprint, not one piece of DNA.
There's no burden on the defense to put on a single witness. The whole burden is on the state of Texas to prove the case.
There is no known murder weapon in this case. That is the core of the state's indictment, that Eric Williams went into the home and shot Cynthia McClellan.
When you have a case like this where the evidence is so strong and so compelling, the only argument you usually are going to be able to make is reasonable doubt. Can a jury say, based on this evidence, beyond a reasonable doubt, Eric Williams is the person who killed the McClellans?
It's like a net. You piece it all together, and it tracks Eric Williams. We have proven this case beyond a reasonable doubt, and we'll ask you for that verdict.
Right before the verdict came back, Eric Williams looked very, very confident. He sat over there with a smirk on his face the entire trial.
We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant, Eric Lyle Williams,
guilty of capital murder as charged in the indictment. You may be seated.
And I think when he heard that the jury found him guilty, it just kind of deflated him. I think he was so delusional, he thought he was going to walk away.
The guilty verdict was a relief. There was a sense of comfort, like, okay.
It was the next phase. That was the nerve-wracking part of it all, is whether he was going to get the death penalty or not.
The challenge here for Bill and Toby was, would a jury give Eric Williams the death penalty? Because you're talking about not your usual capital murder defendant. He was an elected official. He was a justice of the peace. He was law enforcement. He worked for the people of Kaufman County for a number of years, and everybody thought he was a good guy. So are you going to give somebody like that the death penalty, or is life without parole a good enough punishment? Bill and Toby have to prove, in order to get the death penalty in this case, two things: that Eric Williams is a future threat to society, and is there anything in his life that mitigates or makes you think that, okay, because of that circumstance in his life, a life sentence is good enough. That's appropriate enough to deserve that over the death penalty.
Eric Williams was a Mensa member, so they couldn't say he was mentally challenged in any way. He was raised by two parents in a nice home out in the country. He's given every chance in the world. You know, he had a good job as a justice of the peace. So really, what was the mitigation going to be?
Eric Williams looks like every man. And in fact, we made it very clear to the jury that even though he looks normal, he is a deadly psychopath. We actually put on the contents of that storage unit and his massive gun and tactical fantasy collection, just so the jurors could get a glimpse into the mind of Eric Williams. He wasn't this successful lawyer, judge. He was really a violent, dangerous person. And whenever anything went wrong in his life, people were going to pay. Plus, in the punishment phase, we can put in past crimes, bad acts, anything we think might be relevant to helping the jurors.
Take your seats at the stand.
We were able to track down a girlfriend from 1995.
And he said, I have a gun. I have nothing to lose.
Take your seats at the stand.
During the punishment phase of the trial, the prosecutors called Janice Gray to the stand to talk about an incident that happened to her back in 1995 after she and Eric Williams broke up.
We went to I don't know, I guess it was a sports bar type. We had a small conversation about me wanting, to have another relationship. It wasn't anything big. And he said, well, I have a gun. If you walk away, I'll use it. I have nothing to lose. I was maybe shocked, maybe scared. I just stood there.
What Bill and Toby were trying to do is show with Janice Gray, this was just another step in a line of violence that Eric Williams committed. It didn't just begin and end with what happened to Mark Hassey and the McClellans. It started way before that. And that Bill and Toby are showing the jury, you think you know him because he was our Justice of the Peace in Kaufman County. You don't know him at all.
And then we called Kim Williams to the witness stand.
The defense was nervous. They didn't know when we were going to call Kim Williams. You could see the defense lawyers like, is she ever going to come? Because they didn't want her.
Are you guilty of these capital murders?
Yes, I am.
Do we have any deal?
No, we do not.
Did you pull the trigger in these murders?
No, I did not.
Who did?
Eric Williams. He was mad at Mark Hassey. He was mad at Mr. McClellan.
Who did he bear the most animosity towards?
Mark Hassey. Because he prosecuted him.
What was to be your role in the murders?
He wanted me to drive. I so believed in Eric and everything that he told me. His anger was my anger.
I think her testimony was just ice cold. How they plotted this revenge, they planned it.
One of the things that was so compelling and cold was how The night before they were going to murder the McClellans, Eric would model his different law enforcement uniforms. It was like a runway. You know, he would come in and change out. What do you think of this or this one? And his plan was to talk his way in. He was going to say, hey, there's an emergency, you're in danger, I need to come in.
Once he goes into the McClellan home, what happens next?
I hear shots.
How many?
A lot.
What did he tell you about killing Cynthia McClellan?
That she had to die because she would be there as a witness, and he described it as collateral damage.
Kim provided a real glimpse into the sickness that was their life together. She talked about how they went to celebrate after a murder.
How do you and Eric spend the rest of the day, the Saturday before Easter Sunday?
Cooking out.
Were y'all celebrating with steaks?
That's correct.
What was the mood like at the cookout?
Happy. Joyous.
The big piece that we really needed for her in a death penalty trial, we had heard about a potential hit list. And I think in our mind, we were thinking maybe it was written down. When we talked to Kim, she said, no, it wasn't written down. It was just a list that we talked about. In order to get the death penalty, we needed that hit list in to prove that Eric Williams was a future danger.
After the McClellans were killed, were there more on the hit list?
Yes.
Who was that?
Early Wiley.
And who else?
Judge Ashworth.
They were next to be killed by Eric Williams?
Yes.
Lots of items were recovered from that storage shed. And one strange item was a backpack, and it had a crossbow and had like a pickle jar full of some weird liquid. They tested it, and it was homemade napalm. That was going to be very compelling evidence for the penalty phase.
After the McClellans died, who was going to be next?
Judge Ashworth.
Why did he tell you he wanted to kill Judge Ashworth?
He told me that Judge Ashworth was prissy, a prima donna. He got mad all the time at Eric.
Where was the murder supposed to take place?
At his home.
With the crossbow?
That's correct.
What was the napalm for?
I guess to drive in an extra kind of FU. He's going to bore a hole in his stomach and pour it in.
Why are you cooperating with law enforcement? Why are you here testifying against your husband?
Because those families deserve this, and I want to give it to them.
At the conclusion of final argument, the jury is sent out to deliberate. And after the jury deliberated for just a little bit, the judge sent the jury home. So everybody in the courtroom went home wondering what the verdict was going to be.
Anytime you've got a jury out and they go home for the night, that's a long night for the lawyers involved, no matter what side you're on. So maybe started second guessing ourselves, because if we don't give him the death penalty, he's going to keep killing. He's smart enough to be a danger behind bars, too. When we came back the next day, almost immediately, they had a verdict.
Mr. Williams, the jury having found you guilty of the offense of capital murder in this court to carry out the sentence of death.
Was death. I think it was just an overwhelming sense of relief. Lawyers don't high-five after big verdicts. The community didn't high-five on this case. It was just relief that maybe we can try to get back to our normal life.
It's not it makes everything better kind of feeling once they came back with the death sentence. People talk about it being a closure. There is no closure.
That's not going to bring Dad back. It's not going to bring Cynthia back. It's not going to bring Mark Hassey back. You're still dealing with life without them. We were proud in the Kaufman County Sheriff's Office, and Bill and Toby both did a great job. We couldn't have handpicked anybody better to stand up there and be the prosecutors. Those guys were top notch.
After Eric Williams' conviction and death sentence, we sat down with all the family members involved in law enforcement, and we got feedback from everyone involved. Of course, in the run-up to Eric's trial, everyone wanted the death penalty for Kim Williams, including the families. but they were present in the courtroom for Kim's testimony and saw how devastating it was and what a huge role it played in the death penalty for Eric Williams, that they actually had a little bit of mercy and forgiveness in their heart. We ultimately let her plead guilty to 40 years behind bars. So that's the sentence she's currently serving.
I never tried a death penalty case where I knew the victims.
This was the first time that I felt pursuing my passion, prosecuting murder cases, would somehow jeopardize my loved ones and my family.
It was very personal in that way. And also, you felt like you were fighting for the criminal justice system. If you're going to make lawyers targets, then you will have to pay for it.
Mike and Mark lost their lives because of their jobs. And I know we don't typically think of line of duty deaths involving prosecutors, but that's because they're so rare. I do consider it a line of duty death, and I'm glad their service is kind of honored in that way.
I want people to realize and never forget the victims. The name of the person that committed these murders will be in the history books forever. But the 3 people that he killed were wonderful people, and I want their memories to be carried on.
Every day of their lives, they did stuff together. There wasn't a time that he wasn't there and she wasn't there. They were always together doing something.
I hope people remember the determination of our father and how he didn't quit and how he was bullheaded, but he loved everybody.
Mark Hasse stood up for what he believed in, and he paid the price for it. The man who would bring justice for other victims had justice brought for him.
When you take your oath, your job is, as a prosecutor, to seek justice. People don't really think of the prosecutors being the one who keeps the streets safe, but ultimately, if you do your job right, that is what you're doing. When you hear about the elected DA and his main assistant being murdered in Kaufman County, that was a huge reminder to all of us that it's a risky job.